Yeah, I was at a massage and the lady was saying,
I'd like to call this Governance and Priorities Committee meeting to order for October the 7th. I'd like to recognize we're on the traditional territory of Snail First Nations, and before I introduce our clerk, I would just say I have chaired many meetings in my lifetime, but not such an auspicious group as this.
I want you to go easy.
Let's still got a couple of I gotta look up what auspicious means.
Anyway, our clerk this afternoon is Ms. Sheila Gurley. Stumbled on that. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the question period sign-up sheet, which is right there. At the start of the question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to the podium to address council. First order of business is introduction of late items.
Thank you, Chair. So for the late items today, this afternoon, we are adding agenda item 5.2 under the agenda planning portion of the agenda for discussion regarding boathouse and paddling center.
Thank you. Can we have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? So, Councillor Bonner, Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. You would hope that I have more casual. You were up first?
All those in favor?
All those in favor, good idea. Thank you. Now, the minutes as circulated from...
There are no minutes, Chair. Sorry about that.
No minutes.
Yeah, no minutes.
Okay, that's why there's nothing written. Reports. I believe it's your turn. It's great.
So, hello again, Chair and members of the committee. This is part 2 of the presentation that my staff and I presented to you on September 30th under Governance Excellence in your agenda for the Governance and Priorities Committee. So we got through quite a number of the agenda items that day. However, we didn't quite finish the notice of motion policy. There was a staff report that is attached to this agenda as well, and a modified notice of motion draft policy that I did some more work on based on your discussion and council's discussion at the committee meeting of September the 30th. So basically, this newest draft is a notice of motion policy that outlines the steps that should be taken, must be taken, and the options and outcomes of those steps that are taken. So it's basically line by line the steps that need to be taken for a member of council to bring forward a notice of motion, and then the possible options and outcomes available. So I tried to make it less of responsibilities for individuals and more of just a process of what should happen. So under number 1, the member of council identifies the topic, desired outcome, how the resolution adheres to guiding principles in the 2019 to 2022 strategic plan, drafts the resolution and forwards it to the city clerk, copying the mayor and the CAO. So that should happen, obviously. If a member of council wants to bring forward a notice of motion, they should identify those topics. And as a courtesy, the last bullet point, besides drafting the resolution, is forwarding it to the city clerk as well as the mayor and CAO. So then the city clerk adjusts the wording if it's required and discusses the changes with that member of council. determines the appropriate meeting date to bring the notice of motion forward and places it on the agenda. So that's just standard, that's nothing new or modified. Number 3, the member of council brings forward the resolution that is now on the agenda under notice of motion. So this is when it's first on the agenda under notice of motion. The member of council reads it aloud and there's no discussion or debate at this time. Then at the following council meeting that the notice of motion is considered, it's now under other business heading on the agenda. The following options can occur. The motion may be moved by the member of council that initially brought it forward, and it would require a seconder. And then a vote could occur, and the motion could be passed or the motion could be defeated. So those are the options available if that scenario was to occur. Any member of council, so it doesn't have to be the member that brought the notice forward, could defer that resolution back to staff for a report to determine the implications, which include financial, policy, administrative, legal. The motion is in order at any time, so even if the motion was on the floor to pass the notice of motion or the motion now as presented, any member of council could make a motion to defer and it would be in order. It would require a seconder. The motion may be passed and the item then would be referred back to staff. The motion may be defeated and then we would be back to the original motion that was on the floor. And then number 5, if the resolution is referred back to staff, this is trying to address some of the items that were mentioned at the last meeting. Staff reports back to council with a staff report as soon as possible. So it might not be the next meeting because, as I can attest to, sometimes it takes some time to get all the information required and put it into a staff report and then have it in time for the agenda cycle. So we would try for the next meeting. That might not always be possible. And it would outline any potential implications that may apply. And then City Council could vote on the proposed resolution after receiving that staff report on the subject matter if a staff report was required. So this basically isn't a change in process, it just outlines the current process with some added suggestions of best practices. So I tried to take everybody's concerns into consideration and outline it this way and put it into a policy procedure type format. Questions?
Councillor Martin and then Vaughn.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I just have a question, and I don't see it in the policy, I don't think. But it's under 11.2 for the background. You talk about that they will place a notice of motion with any relevant background information. And under the options, it talks about the disadvantage is the notice of motions may be delayed if you're looking for more background information, but I don't see it in the policy itself. So is it mandatory?
So in the actual report, the notice of motion 11.1, 2, and 3, that's what's in our procedure bylaw. So that outlines the process in a procedure bylaw. The policy outlines those steps to take to get to the procedure bylaw to meet the requirements in the procedure bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vaughn.
Thank you, Chair Turley. And through you to Ms. Gurry. Under number 2, second bullet, determines appropriate meeting date to bring notice of motion forward. Is there any reason why it wouldn't be the next council meeting that something might come up?
No, the next meeting date might not be a council meeting. Currently, there is a committee of the whole meeting. Notices of motion should be on a council meeting. So that's basically, unless it was specifically wanted to go from meeting to meeting. You could have a notice of motion for a governance and priorities committee meeting, finance and audit committee meeting, but then that motion's dealt with at that next committee meeting. So it's kind of determining what meeting you want it to go to, and then the next appropriate meeting would be the one.
In order, we have, did you have anything else, Councillor? No. Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. This reads much clearer to me than the original one, so thank you. I still struggle a little bit about having a policy around something we have an agreement around, given that we're not putting everything else we have an agreement around into a policy. But I do appreciate this is really well laid out, and I understand that this has been a bit of a tripping hazard for us as a council. And so, when I was thinking about would this policy have been useful for me, kind of from day one going forward, it would. So, so I just want to say I appreciate it, and I'm absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
And just a point, this doesn't preclude when we're having our meetings at the GPC when it's obvious that we're all in agreement with something for Mr. Rudolph to just say that he'll have a staff report done. So I think it's important that we recognize that too. This is for stuff that's kind of just out of the blue.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I was planning on making that point, that there still is the agenda planning process at the end of the Governance and Priorities Committee for you to bring up topics, have a discussion, and decide whether to proceed or not at this meeting.
Councillor Braun.
Yeah, just to add on that, actually, I think I've been in a circumstance where I've had an idea for a notice of motion, and then after talking to Mr. Rudolph, sort of realized, hey, that's coming down the pipeline anyways, and it wasn't an urgent matter, so I do think there's a lot of merit in having those conversations.
Any further questions? Mayor Crowe.
Then I would move that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend the council approve the notice of motion of policy.
Secondary Councillor Dieselman. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
The next item under the same heading is additional committees. So first, I believe Ms. Snellgrove is going to come up and talk to you about the Nanaimo Youth Advisory Council Committee and options moving forward with that committee. And then I'll be back up to talk to you again.
Welcome, Ms. Snellgrove. The floor is yours.
So I'm going to be speaking to you about some additional committees. So we have some committees coming down the pipeline, so the Economic Development Steering Committee and the Official Community Plan Steering Committee. Those terms of reference are on their way to you. So the Nanaimo Youth Advisory Council was formed in 2014 with the intent to provide a youth perspective on municipal issues. The group is not currently meeting, pending direction from council, and there are a number of current engagement opportunities for youth in the community, which include direct programming such as drop-in programs, community-based programs, arenas, and aquatic-based programs. There are leadership development opportunities, which include the Leaders in Training program, the Quest program, and the Junior Leaders in Training and Babysitter programs. Advocacy and events include the Youth Advocates Committee, Youth Week, and Youthapalooza. And a youth strategy is underway with a Masters of Planning student from VIU currently. And a youth representative will be included on the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness. So some of the challenges that we've faced with the Youth Council are related to finding a consistent meeting date and time. Many of the members are students with varying schedules. And current members appear to be drawn from youth with higher access to resources and support. And youth may not be fully representative of the diversity of youth in our community. So we have a recommendation in the report before you to dissolve the Youth Council, and staff will continue to engage youth in the methods. Are there any questions?
We have Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Martin.
Just a suggestion, I think we should be holding on all of our committees one spot for youth. I think it would be an important place to get them in and get their involvement in them. And that way we don't have to have them looking at all different areas if they've got an interest, such as we did with the economic development. We ensured there was a youth person. We're doing the same for environment, sorry. I would even look at the same for each of our committees, that I think it'd be important if that's where we can hold a position for you. And then we would get those that are really interested in that, not just a huge wide array of issues. So I'd like to throw that out as a consideration for a later discussion.
Councillor Martin. Oh, Jacob.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that we're not really suggesting that we dissolve the committee. We're really saying that this isn't necessarily the best way to tap into the youth in the community. So we're trying to align a committee thing that really doesn't work too well for the youth into something that really goes into their lifestyle and relates to them. So there's a lot of avenues to be engaged, and participating on committees is one of them. But we just find that this committee is really possibly an outdated model that in working with the youth, and that we're really we're pivoting to repurpose how the engagement process takes place. And we need to be deliberate on that. So it's not really dismantling, is it, to the redeploying of assets and resources to actually engage in a more effective way. And I think the youth would very much support this.
And Chair, just to add to that, I was going to say something similar, though not as well put, so thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Definitely more appropriate or more current ways of engaging with youth is what we're always looking for. Our new software that we went over the last meeting on September 30th, Bang the Table, will have many more opportunities, as well as, I believe, utilizing our Instagram account, which is the highest used form of social media that youth do use. We're going to be looking at ways constantly to engage with youth, as well as if you move forward with the proposed Inclusiveness and Accessibility Committee that we'll be talking about in just a moment. So there'll be a spot for them there, and further engagement with them in every way possible, just not in the way that we currently do, as it just wasn't appropriate or wasn't working for them.
Okay, so we have Councilors Martin, Hemmons, and Mayor Brewer.
Thank you. Do I say Mayor Turley?
No,
Chair Turley.
Only when
Thank you.
I don't get the big bucks.
Not yet, anyway.
Thank you. And actually, Councillor Armstrong took the words right out of my mouth. So that's what I was hoping, that we would be able to look at youth being involved in all our committees, that there's one seat there for them. And I would really hope that when this goes forward to the public, that we don't see on the headlines of the newspaper that we're dissolving this. I would rather we use the language of we're redeploying or redistributing, that youth will be involved. And then also, I think we're going to be having conversations with School District 68 coming up, and making sure that if there's a youth advisory committee or something like that with the school district, that somebody as a council also attends those, so that they can listen to what the youth are saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hemmons.
Thank you. Following along those lines, I like the idea of reserving a seat for youth at every one of our committees, although I do know that youth, I believe, require a little bit more support to sit on committees, so we just think about staff capacity in that way, and ensuring that whoever is chosen is well supported to do so. I think the school district is a wonderful opportunity this meeting to talk about it on Thursday. And I also think we have really great youth organizations already doing work in our city. I'm thinking of the Nanaimo Youth Services Association, the Nanaimo Aboriginal Center. It would be great to, maybe invite youth to a GPC to talk about youth engagement, so we're not trying to recreate a model that works for them, but to actually hear from folks who are already doing youth engagement in the community about, what they're doing and what works and how we can support them. So.
And just to add to that, I know members of staff, Mr. Harding, can attest to it too, that they are constantly reaching out to see just what youth actually prefer and what they need, and how we can work with them and what works for them.
Mayor Brewer.
Thank you very much, Chair. Following on what Councillor Hemmons already had to say, and speaking as the chronologically third eldest member of this council, I want to pay my compliments to staff for the sensitive nature of this report and the recognition that communicating and bringing youth into what we'll call the decision-making circles of municipal government is a difficult thing to do. I think that Councillor Martin's comments about, we don't want to see some ugly headline that suggests, we're abolishing a youth advisory council as if it's a terrible thing, when in fact this is a really solid step forward that shows sensitivity around youth. I want to particularly recommend and also comment on the concept that youth we need to involve are not necessarily, as has been pointed out, going to school actively. They are involved with NYSA, some of them are on the streets. There's a whole pile of places where the young people in this community are not connected to formal organizations, and that, I think the staff report in a very sensitive and appropriate way recognizes that. This is a very positive step forward for this community. As someone who most people know, and I say it again publicly for the record, does not engage in social media, except when I'm the subject of attacks, and my kind friends point out that's occasionally the case. I'm conscious of the fact that that's where it's at with younger people, regardless of where they fit in the economic and social strata of our community. So well done, everyone. I'm very appreciative of this.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'll support the staff recommendation on this for the reasons that others have elaborated on, and I agree with their comments. I think it also, for me, relates directly to the next topic, and you've already said that, Ms. Gurry, and I think we need to we need to quickly look at that, and I think that's something that I'll also be very interested in supporting. So for that reason, and a couple of others that I won't speak on at this time, I will, when the motion is put forward, support this recommendation. My question, though, is, following up on Mayor Krog's earlier comment, speaking as the chronologically second oldest member of this august body, what was the word you used, Chair? Auspicious. It goes to definition, and I would assume that youth refers to anybody under 50.
Most definitely, yes.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I guess now would be the time for a motion.
Move the motion.
Councilor Armstrong, seconded by Councilor Brown. Any other further discussion? Oh, you're ready to vote?
No, I'm
Yeah,
ready to
the
discuss.
discussion, okay.
I think it's a good move, changing it up. I don't think that the council, from reports I had, was as productive and as useful engaging the youth as it could be, and I think we need to move past sort of token ways of engagement. I would say that I'm excited that there is a youth school District 68 Youth Sustainability and Climate Action Committee that is being formed, that's linked up to the eco clubs in each of the high schools. And this group is going to be focusing on looking at ways that they could help their schools with active transportation, waste management, and very meaningful changes in how the school does its business. And I think that there could potentially be some great opportunity for partnership with the city in supporting this group in however form that may appear. So I'm excited about that meaningful action. Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
Yes. Chronologically ninth oldest. Just following up on Councilor Brown's comments, just questions for the staff, and then would we be able to get some more information about that next week or this week at the meeting? Is that something?
Yes, I believe when you meet with the school board, council to board, I think you could definitely bring that up and ask for some more information on that.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Okay, I'm 2 for 2. So next, I would like to talk to you about not a new idea. In fact, it originated from this table, I do believe, is the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness. So based on your discussions at this table and discussions from the public and initiatives that staff have undertaken over the years, we're bringing forward recommending that this council strike a committee called Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness. So its mandate would be to identify potential barriers within existing and proposed city plans, policies, bylaw, and infrastructure, and make recommendations to ensure that they are inclusive and accommodating to citizens of all ages, abilities, and walks of life. So it would, the goals would be to identify those barriers and best practices, make recommendations for improvements, review city plans, policies, procedures, bylaws, and assist in developing a strategy for increased engagement and public awareness. The new committee proposed with the terms of reference provided for in your agenda. For your consideration, the membership would consist of 2 council members, plus 2 citizens at large, and key representatives from various agencies, groups, including, but not limited to, and this is a draft, so your input would be helpful. Child Development Center, Island Health, Multicultural Society, Nanaimo Association for Community Living, Nanaimo Pride Society, Nanaimo Senior Task Force, Nanaimo Youth Services Association, School District 68, United Way of Central Vancouver Island. And staff did seek other staff's input and consideration for that membership. And I think that if you want any more information on the membership and what's included, Mr. Harding has some good background to provide you on that, as well as he would be probably the lead, or he would be the lead senior manager of this committee for staff resources, along with, of course, it would be interdepartmental with Mr. Lindsay and Mr. Sims as well, including their input from a staff capacity in my department from a logistics perspective as well.
Councillor Armstrong?
Two things. I would actually like to see the name change to the new term, which is Diversibilities, which is the nationally recognized term now. They don't use accessible anymore. It's Diversibilities. So I think that would be a move in the right direction. And secondly, for consideration on the task force, CNIB should be considered because that's where we get a lot of complaints from, is those with eyesight challenges, and they're not on any of those. So I think CNIB is a very crucial part because they're very much affected by a lot of our decisions. But I really would like to see the name change to Diversibilities.
Eric Rose?
Thank you very much. I just want to comment on the absence of a representative of Nunavut First Nation, because I think that may be of interest to people who are watching and paying attention to this. And that is done on the basis, fairly deliberately, out of respect for Nunavut First Nation, recognizing that they quite appropriately treat themselves and are treated by us as a recognized order of governance in this country. And this is seen as a city responsibility. That does not in any way exclude members of Nunavut First Nation from participating in these committees, depending on who the representatives come from, the various organizations. But I think it needs to be made clear that this was done in a deliberate and respectful way, not by way of omission or negligence.
Councillor Hammonds, Desert
Thank you, Chair. I was in support of this committee when it was first proposed. I want to acknowledge I feel like this one could be really unwieldy and will require a lot of staff support. It's a big group. I'm curious, as someone who has worked on healthy city committees before, if there's anything in the community that already has this representation that the city could tap into, and whether that was considered as staff was developing the terms of reference. Obviously, I think it's important to include the voices of those who are typically not represented in decision-making, and I really appreciate the tie-in to that push for our OCP and that kind of master planning process to get this up and running in time for these voices to be included in that. But I do want to flag that sometimes a challenge with groups like this can be that it can feel a little bit like tokenism because, well, look, we have someone from SNANAMO sitting on this committee that reviewed the OCP planning process or whatever. So it's just a concern that I'm holding. I don't, I'm in support of the group. I'm just noting this concern. I had the same issue with Indigenous representation, and I'm curious if there was any consideration to bringing in a women's group, like the Haven Society or any group that represents women in the community.
I am not sure, to be 100% honest with you. Richard, did we think of that?
I think when we went through, we put a variety of examples on the board that kind of gives across of the community, with the idea the council could definitely, as we go through a discussion like this, add, take away, move things around that we'd like to see.
And I think the purpose mostly behind this is to get that underrepresented view on our bylaws and policies that I know is important to this council, but also to staff too as well. So something that we haven't thought of in our policies or processes, getting that view from this this broad committee would be helpful when we are creating our bylaws and plans, etc. We often hear of it afterwards. Yeah. Richard, Mr. Hardy.
Well, I think the first part of Councilor Hammond's question, you started off, things. Could this committee be, is it currently in some other body? Years ago, there used to be an arm's length committee, I forget the actual name, it was, I forget the name, that was looking more at this, but it's more arm's length. I think with this, does this give us we are always looking for other lenses of looking at particular, access to our facilities, access to programs, things outside even our facilities that are in groups. What are some barriers to participation, access?
So it does provide a broader, and also they're very common in other communities to have committees like this.
And just to add to that, we did look at best practices from Maple Ridge. Prince George has one of these as well, and there was one other municipality, it might be Kamloops. So we did look at how they comprised their committees and took the best of, well, what we think was the best of all of those to create these terms of reference for you.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. Just a comment. I, again, want to reiterate, I fully support it. I just think with a committee of this size, I just, again, want to flag staff capacity is probably going to be an issue, and it's something I think about as a council. In early portion of our term, we decided we were going to do governance a little bit differently and set the table here at the GPC to have these deeper conversations and maybe not do as many committees, and here we are building more committees again. And it's not, I think it's appropriate and I support it. I just, I want to flag that these committees, and particularly this one, I imagine, will probably come with a lot of staff hours.
Councillor Gissel.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. I think this committee is a good idea. I think really being mindful on how it's deployed and used is going to be the art of making it useful, and some thought definitely can be given to that. In terms of representation, I have a few questions. In terms of Stenemo, I believe, like with our POG, I think there's, I think as a nation, they have ample opportunity and ways of dealing with the city, the province, and so in terms of membership, I'm not quite sure. However, I do think that our urban Indigenous community is underrepresented, and is a group that definitely it could be useful to make a seat. And then I got a question just in with regards to the United Way of Central. I'm always trying to think, if we have a committee, we want to build a network so that it's a group that's connected to other groups, so that if we need to get pulse on folks living with a particular disability, we have a point person that is inputted into the city that can be representative advocating on a larger group of folks. And identifying the different groups that we want to make sure that are represented and have a voice. Just with the United Way, I'm curious, would that be folks living in poverty, or like just the thought behind the United Way?
I believe that's one group that can help us look at some of those access issues. Again, programs or access to facilities.
Okay, and then the other group I think is folks advocating on behalf of individuals that are living with addiction. Those are two very connected things, and I'm just curious. Pardon?
Mr. Chair, the United Way represents or has programs that deliver to a wide array of people that in need. One of the client groups that they have is dealing with the homeless populations. They are the entity, the federal government entity in this community, and they have for a long time served in that capacity. So they do provide a conduit into the committee for certainly a whole suite of types of circumstances of people that are living on the edges of housing and poverty and so forth. So they're an agency that touches a lot of what would be considered some of the fringes of need in the community. So if you were looking to a placeholder for one group that has a pulse on that, they would certainly be the strongest that probably comes up to the top. But that's just one of a number of client groups that they serve. So it's a logical place to go if you're trying to, instead of having 3 or 4 or 5 agencies, to try to get the one that has most of those agencies represented at their table when they meet.
And just if I may build on this, I mean, developing a committee like this is inherently very tricky, and there's a lot of nuances to pay attention to. Sometimes I think, okay, we're trying to find representation for particular groups that have less of a voice, and we end up creating a committee of professionals that are from organizations that are, making a decent living in that. And I know that there's a balance on that, but just a thought.
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, as I indicated earlier, I basically support this idea, but I do have some concerns. Councillor Hemmons raised one of them, and that is the fact that we were moving away from a large number of committees for a reason, and here we are reestablishing several committees. And I think this one is worthy. I think it's a committee that we should indeed look at. I struggle with the terms of reference, partly because of the unwieldiness of the proposed committee and the staff resources it would take up. I'm wondering if we might look at a different schedule of frequency of meeting, or as needed when issues arise.
That's a really good point. I was actually thinking of that with what Councillor Hemmons was saying as well, that maybe the frequency needs to be 2 or 3 months instead of monthly. Maybe 2 or 3 months.
Thank you. And if I may, the other thing, and I always struggle with this when we set out to identify specific groups that we want represented, we automatically run the risk of leaving out some. We've already had 3 or 4 additional suggestions, good suggestions, made just in the past 15 minutes. So as soon as you identify that you want somebody who is visually impaired, well, what about hearing impaired? Well, what about physically impaired? And it just goes on and on. So I struggle with that. The intention is good. I'm wondering if an alternate way of structuring such a committee might be to put out a blanket call to the community that explains what this committee is about and explains the mandate and invites all organizations to, if they wish, submit a candidate. And then when the council meets, we select what we consider to be a good cross-section of representation. It's just an alternate way of determining the committee members. So I throw that out there as an idea.
So just a couple of things to say to that before we move on. The unwieldiness of this came from trying not to exclude somebody or a certain organization or group, and Mr. Harding could probably speak a little bit more to that. But one of the problems with blanket out, this is what we're looking for, council could run into why wasn't I selected issues from somebody that puts down that they're of this nationality or from this organization and they're not chosen. So there's some issues around the way we do a call for membership. We could look into it a little bit more. I just know that in past, when we went through the committee renewal process in 2016, that was one of the options when we were reviewing terms of reference that the committee had talked about, the previous committees working on the new committees, and that was just a point that was raised, and it was a good one, that when we're looking for certain types of membership, to have them put it down and then not be chosen, we could run into those types of problems.
So if I may, Chair, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Ray. I appreciate that, and I think your point's well taken. So I appreciate that you've looked at other areas and you've tried to determine best practice in this. It's a tough one to put together, but basically I will be supportive of it. So thank you.
And I don't know if Mr. Harding wants to talk about where these 13 members came from or the rationale behind.
Mr. Chairman, we looked at other communities, what some of their makeup has been. We thought this was more of a cross section of the community, where we got the Child Development Center, which we're just coming off a very successful partnership with them in designing our first 100% inclusive playground to build commercial mowing for Maffeo this winter. So that was coming off of that, and then the others were just again trying to find a broad cross section of the community. That means with any kind of committee, this is other groups or organizations that, as the committee was working through the work plan, wanted to come and do a presentation, talk to council, and council deferred them those issues. That's another part of the council to refer those groups, or if we miss somebody, get those issues to council.
Okay, next in order is Councillor Brown, Bonner, and Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Big thank you to staff for bringing this forward. I think this is a really challenging thing to try to piece together, and for the concerns that were raised, and I think this is a great attempt to do so. And cognizant of that, I don't think we should let sort of the perfect committee makeup stand in the way of progress of something that we don't already have. And I think, yes, it might be a difficult committee, especially with the numbers, especially with the diverse perspectives. But I think that's like the work that's involved, and it is going to take effort and time. And I think that if it gets to be a severe point, I would hope, and this would be a question that staff would report back on any committee that's not functioning well, for whether it's structural or the makeup of the members or the chair would report back to council. I definitely went through that same sort of thought process around listing folks, not listing folks, and decided to do a fair bit of reading on it. And when it's generally just left to applications at large, I think we all have selection bias. As much as we try to train our minds and retrain our minds with learned behavior and things that we learn through our own cultures, research shows time and time again people have selection bias when they're not aware of it. And so I think this does strike a balance by leaving it up to individual organizations to nominate members, and also has 2 members at large to try to fill gaps. But I think it's always a question that we should be asking ourselves is, no matter what we're doing, is who's not at the table, and should they be at the table? And I hope this committee might identify that, or we as a council and all the work that we do and staff that they do, that we begin to ask ourselves that, is the makeup right, and is how we're selecting individuals right. So again, thank you so much for bringing this forward. Hopeful and optimistic that it will pass, and I think it's a really good first step in helping meet our strategic plan as we go, especially as we go through these major planning processes to get the input that's not always heard. So thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. And just a conversation here. I was actually quite agreeing with Mr. Thorpe, Councillor Thorpe, regarding the makeup of the members. Just throw it out and ask everybody to apply. I understand the conversations since then, so I'm kind of leaning towards this option again. One of my questions, like this one says, in this terms of reference, says must include. So is that what we're going to be passing today, or are we going to figure this out a bit more?
So this is just a draft, so we can figure this out a bit more based on the discussion today. Unless you want us to cut down on the membership number, what I'm suggesting is if you make the recommendation to proceed with this, we would bring back a not draft terms of reference with your direction today. And unless you want us to reduce the membership number, the only change that I would recommend is that the meeting frequency be changed to every 2 months or as needed. I would, based on the discussion and very good points from Councillor Hemmons, I would make that suggestion.
One more? Okay.
A couple more, if I may. Have these organizations been approached already?
No, they have not.
Okay. And I guess my other question, two comments here is, should we not be doing this work on everything we do? Like, shouldn't we just, if we're coming up with a plan, we should be sending it out to the general community and saying we want some input on this? Like, if we're going to be redoing a street and we already have the plans done up, like we're going to be doing the work on Metro, shouldn't this be automatically come out and we actually should be part of the report? Here's what we heard back from these various organizations in terms of accessibility. So that's something that I think we should be doing, because if we did that, this committee did that for everything that the city's working on, it'd be pretty well bogged down. It'd be meeting daily. The other question I have is, how are we going to incorporate the recommendations that we do get from them?
So to answer the latter, or the former first, so we do different types of engagements, so different projects, programs. We ask for input in different ways of engagement. This is yet another way to engage. So the purpose of this committee is to engage those individuals that are underrepresented in this way. So this is a form of engagement, not the only form. It wouldn't be everything, but it would be where accessibility or inclusiveness is an issue. So a lot of the things we do and a lot of the policies, everything we can think of, we will do that. But staff do that already themselves as it is. And there's not just this form of engagement. This would just be an additional form of engagement. And your last question was?
How will we, like, if they're going to make recommendations, how are we going to incorporate that into our plans?
So the committee would make a recommendation. That recommendation would go to council. If council approves that recommendation, then staff have to then incorporate it into their plans.
We have Councilor Armstrong next. And
Just following up on what Councilor Bonner said, I still remain concerned on the lack of those with accessibility issues. We have nobody represented from when we did the motion on the handicap parking. We heard from all sorts of people in wheelchairs that they couldn't reach the meters to pay for parking, and that group is not represented there. Same thing with the blind, they're not represented there. So I'm very concerned about, like, and I go back to what Councillor Thorpe said, you know, if we start leaving out some of these key groups, it's not good. So I'm really concerned about that, because these are the people that, like, you know, I was going to ask Mr. Lindsay, when we're looking at that stuff, is there recommendations that come forward from them on the things, because obviously it wasn't done for the parking meters because they can't reach them. So those are things I'm concerned about. Like, these are the complaints we're getting from people in our community, yet they're not represented on the advisory committee. So I'll just throw that out. And again, like I still think we should be changing the terms of diversibilities.
Okay, so next we have three more, Councilor Gesselbrack, Hammonds, and Martin.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just speaking to Councillor Armstrong's points, I think that specific disabilities, for example, people with blindness, they are captured under the representative from Island Health, Community Living BC, because I think that they're looking, well, my interpretation is that maybe we could have some clarification on that.
Right, so, Mr. Chairman, we didn't go to every CNIB as the example, but definitely using the Child Development Center, which of course looks at all aspects of for youth and it's visual, physical, and also the National Association of Community Living does have a broader view in the sense of that. But it's, you could add a whole different groups. Just again, we thought this was a good cross example of a community that we should capture. Also, even with the School District 68, ideally that'd be a trustee representative that have a broad aspect of what the schools are dealing with with that population. We could go through each of them.
Right, and just point of process, do we need a motion to amend this? Like, for example, to move to, say, quarterly meetings and as needed? How do we do that?
First, we don't have a motion on the table yet, so we'd have to have that first before you can amend it. But I do have two speakers that requested. I'm going to let Councilor Martin go first, because she's not spoken before on this, followed by Councilor Hammonds.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying about those with whether it's physical or hearing or eyesight, etc. But I believe that many in these groups can actually would incorporate Child Development Center, not only youth, but they start to have an understanding of what it is with adults, with diverse abilities. I do like the name. And also United Way is a wealth of information on all different aspects of the barriers that present, and an IMO Association for Community Living. So I think if there was something specific, like I know some of us have been reached out to the fact of those who physically cannot see and some of the barriers or challenges they have when they have to walk down sidewalks and construction sites. So I think that we could get this information from these groups here.
Thank you. Councilor Hammonds.
Thank you. Just based on the conversation, I want to go back to an earlier question, and I don't think I had it answered, and that's that have we investigated whether a group like this already exists in the community that has this composition. And my rationale for asking is that the majority of these are nonprofit entities, and participating on a committee can be quite time-consuming. And coming from the nonprofit world, I'll just offer an experience I had where we began a group, and it started off really, really well, and then membership dwindled. And when I started to investigate why, it was because that group already existed elsewhere and we just weren't at the table. And so given that we're talking about possibly meeting bi-monthly or quarterly or as needed, I wonder if this table exists somewhere that we could bring our plans to and ask for input rather than creating a whole new committee. I support the committee absolutely, in particular if it doesn't already exist, because I think these are important conversations that we need to chew on and also to lead. But if this group exists in some form elsewhere, maybe we could just tap into that. So did we investigate that at all?
I didn't myself. My staff worked on the report in terms of reference. I know Mr. Harding had some involvement in it, but...
The only one we remember is Access and Nanaimo. It was a group, but I believe it was arm's length, and it hasn't formally been meeting for a number of years. So I think it's dissolved. Definitely each of these organizations on the board actually already do some of the things individually themselves on access and inclusiveness. I think I get here now coming out of council's desire to explore this was more, can we now formally get a lot of these groups together and review it. So if there's one out there that hasn't formally come to us, and typically if it's a public facility, we'll hear from those groups quickly because our public facilities are the easiest ones to audit and make comments about. And I haven't heard from a group for a number of years.
I think we have Mr. Rudolph next, and then after that, I think probably it's time to entertain a
Again,
motion.
Mr. Chair, again, we're trying to provide a conduit to council and to the municipal set of services that we provide for folks that would fall under this category. Maybe there's a process that we can do, sort of a two-step here. So we're putting this out there on the table, and there's been a lot of good input. And maybe there could be a period where we're soliciting input and feedback on the notion around this whole thing, and on our website and contacting various of these agencies and others who we may not have identified. Retrieve some of that information and come back to you and report on that, and then firm up the terms of reference, and then take it to council. So we could almost have a two-step. We're not trying to make it perfect, but we're not trying to intentionally or unintentionally have consequences. So it might be a bit of a process which would pay off if we put it up there for 30 days, said, well, this is being contemplated, we'd like some feedback, do a bit of a survey or something around that, and then report back to you, and then we could firm this up and then take it to council. That way, we've at least made an effort to engage. We have also, as indicated, there are a few municipalities that have had long-standing committees like this, and they seem to work, and this is based on some of those. So if it gets to be all things to all people, it becomes less effective ultimately. So there needs to be a focus. I'd suggest maybe there's no rush this month to get this launched, but there's a desire to move forward. So a little bit of consultation would be helpful. And it doesn't have to be big public meetings and that type of thing. It's just soliciting input. So that's just one.
Thank you. And I think if I could have just a small comment. I think back to the disabled parking and parkades and the challenges we had over that. I think if we'd had a committee at that time, regardless of whether there's representation from disabled people or not, that we could put it back to, that we would then investigate whether or not there are real issues with regard to parking meters and their accessibility and that type of thing, before we make a knee-jerk reaction and end up maybe not being the correct one. So that's my only concern about not having such a committee. So at this point in time, I guess the process would be to have somebody move the motion and second and vote on it, or amend it, or if you want to delay implementation, then it would be deferral or referral.
Yeah, you could refer it back to staff for more information and input, and return with that information and a new draft in terms of reference.
Councilor Thorpe.
I was just going to make that motion.
Thank you.
Chair, to refer back to staff as Mr. Rudolph suggested.
except we don't have the motion on the floor, or we just going to...
That could be a motion that stands by itself.
That is okay, that's fine, good. And second, okay, any discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
And then just further, before I'm done, Councillor Hemmons obviously read my slides. Just to keep you, remind you of what we went over in April about meeting resources. So just the type of staff support and time that each committee takes. So to keep this in the back of your head when you are creating committees and the new way of governance that this council has moved forward with, just to keep these in mind when creating them. We are here to work for you and accommodate you, but having this in the back of your minds would be helpful, especially if and when it comes to a time that we do need more resources.
If I could just interrupt, I believe Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I would really like to look at forming a public safety task force again. I think it's really needed in the community. I think we really heard that loud and clear at the public meeting the other day. I think there's a lot of challenges that the city's facing. They're only going to get bigger. And I think it would be good to have public representation at the table and also get the messaging out and stuff. So I would like us to consider bringing that back.
So before we do that, did you have anything further on meeting resources you'd like to look at first? And then...
Thank you, Chair. So just, there was a few slides. I won't go through all of the details because they were on your last agenda as well. But the one thing, due to scheduling conflicts, so there's that to consider for yourself. So not just for our staff resources, but your schedules as well. So the things that we have to consider when trying to schedule you these committees is your council meetings, committee meetings, the Regional District of Nanaimo board meetings, your RDN committee meetings, Chamber of Commerce luncheons, and that leaves only 5 times available each month for additional committees to meet. So it's a really packed and busy schedule for you already, so that's just another thing to keep in mind, as well as these further committees that will be coming most likely, definitely the first 2, and if you proceed with the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness, or whatever you choose to call it, that will be an additional committee as well, or time. So there's that, and I'm just going to see if I had printed the previous terms of reference for committees, just to see if I could give you any help or support with the public.
While you're doing that, we have 3 other councillors who'd like to... Did you have any further, Councillor?
No, just I think that we really need to explore a public safety task
Next is
force.
Councillor Martin, followed by Brown and Jones.
Thank you, Chair Turley. And understanding that we have limited time and staff energy and our energy and community's energy, but I really do believe what Councillor Armstrong says, that a safety task force, something that our community shows that we're actively engaged and working on those types of social issues within our community. I understand that our housing task force has a mandate of working with housing, but not necessarily the other social issues within our community, such as food security or safety. So my suggestion is a combination of doing a safety and a social planning type of committee that would incorporate both of those.
Okay, so next we have Councillor Brown, followed by Giselbrecht and Philip.
Thank you, Chair Turley. I definitely agree with the sentiment expressed from Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Orman. I am cognizant that public safety is not in our strategic plans. So going back to the conversations around our strategic plan, it was very clearly pulled from it. We had that discussion then. I'm not saying that we don't need it. I think that's something we probably should reconsider. But a committee may be the path forward, but I'm not convinced. And so that's why I'm wondering if there might be other methods or other approaches that might be more effective. And that's why I was putting this out there, that maybe it's time, based on the meetings the other night, probably all the emails and conversations everybody is having is very similar to mine. I know, Your Worship, you've talked about businesses that have consistently raised these issues, that we probably should have a GPC day. We should consider having a GPC on this very topic and chart a path forward, or maybe not, whatever you decide, but have that information and have that more robust conversation.
Councilor Hazelburn, and then Ford and Crowe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, yeah, just to add support to what Councillor Brown is saying in terms of having this discussion at, the soonest future GPC. I think it would be timely and necessary, and then we can discuss how we want to address public safety and the merits of and what a potential task force would be tasked with, and to move forward that way.
We've got Councillor Thorpe, followed by Krog, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I certainly would be happy to entertain a conversation on this topic, and I agree with what Councillor Brown and Geselbrock just said. But I'm not seeing it on today's agenda, so I think this conversation is perhaps premature. And I think at a GPC it would be most appropriate. I have certainly some thoughts on it, pro and con. But again, I'm not sure that we. Well, I would ask Ms. Gurry because I don't see it listed on.
I think if I could interject,
You could park the idea at this time, but at the end of every GPC, you have a chance to review the agenda, the agendas for forthcoming GPCs, and so towards the end of the day, you would have that opportunity. It's not currently on this part of the agenda, but one of the parts of all our GPCs now is that you look at the schedule, and then you could certainly schedule this and other topics in at the end of the day. So there's actually an agenda item where you could have this discussion.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with both Councillor Thorpe and Mr. Rudolph. However, I did let Councillor Armstrong know that with the topic of additional committees, that she could bring it up at this time, she is in order right now. However, if you wanted to talk more about a GPC day involving this whole subject matter, I believe that we could do that at the end during the agenda point.
Okay, so I'm inclined, and I'll use my chair's prerogative here, to let the remaining three speakers say their piece, and then we can move on. So we had Mayor Krog next.
I was just going to say, let's deal with it at the end of the meeting, because I have some thoughts on this topic that following Councillor Thorpe's and Councillor Brown and Geselbrock's comments as well.
Followed by Councillor Armstrong.
I just want to make 2 points when you say that it's not part of our strategic plan. I say it is. And secondly, our 2 largest budget items are public safety, which is our fire department and our police department. So I would say public safety is throughout the whole city, as well as in economics. If we don't have a safe community, people aren't going to come here for economics as well as for livability. So I do believe it's reflected there. I'll just leave it at that.
Followed by Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, I'll save it for the end.
You're saving the end, okay. So, next on the agenda is presentation from Chief Fry.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest 3 minutes?
Yeah, let's have a 10-minute break.
I was going to say 3.
I'm timing it.
Oh, yeah, you got it. I don't think so. We have to start
there then, but it's just not.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, and
Every invoice.
So who's going to escalate the grades?
you're getting reduction.
A few seconds ahead, but I think we'll start now. Keith Fry, you're on the podium.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair and Council. So first of all, I'd like to recognize that it's Fire Prevention Week. So it's a perfect timing, not that we really thought about that when we were talking about our service delivery and really state of the union and where the fire department is. I haven't had an opportunity to really stand before you other than through the budget process. So our report today, I'd like to introduce our staff that came along. I have Deputy Chief Greg Norman, Assistant Chief Jeff Whiting, and Assistant Chief Jody Lemesurier. And as well as part of this fire department update and service delivery plan, we work in collaboration with the IFF and our staff members when we were determining what our service levels were going to be in our public education process. So as part of that, we like to work together and bring our whole department on board, because sometimes if it's just the fire chief's idea, it's not really accepted as well. So that's where we're at with that. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an update on what our outline is going to be. We're going to give you a quick heads up on Fire Station number 1 and where we are with that. Some of the things that we talked about during the budget process, and you know are my priorities, which are our current health and wellness initiatives. An update and status on our current workload. Some of the other initiatives in public education outreach that we're doing. Some of our training initiatives. And planning for growth responses and service delivery, and a couple of recommendations at the end. And as you recall, when we sat in budget during your first few weeks in council, you asked me a couple of questions and things you wanted me to look at, and hopefully today I can give you some answers on those as well. So, Fire Station number 1. Since we met last, early June, we had an open house. Many of you attended that, an information session or open house with the community. We did a value engineering workshop, and what a value engineering workshop is, it allows us to take a look at all the components we are asking for and seeing if we can tighten the budget or tighten the costing so we're fiscally responsible. We've hired an independent commissioning agent. He's been appointed, or they have been appointed. We have submitted our development permit application, so we're hoping the City of Nanaimo supports our bid for that. We have been delivered a Class B cost estimate. I don't know too much about the cost estimate, but Class B is plus or minus 20%, I believe, smaller, 15%. And we have had our 50% design documents delivered. It's all technical stuff. So in the next steps, and when, you're probably wondering, when are we going to be coming back to council and asking for any variances? So currently this week, we are meeting with the Design Advisory Panel, where they'll have an opportunity to provide feedback to our architects and to our project team on the development of the Fire Station 1. We will then be getting a development permit variance, and in October this month, we'll also be getting our 75% design documents completed, and then a cost check number 3, which is a Class A, so it's going to be the tightest costing that we have on the building itself prior to the tender going out. We are planning to do an advanced procurement notice and presentation, and that has come through. Again, we are working with CAPEX project management to make sure that we're following the proper project management templates. We will be publishing the construction tender in December, and we're going to hopefully be awarding that construction contract in or around May of 2020, and then the fund begins. So we will begin the building, and the next steps will be completion, still on target, on budget, and within scope of 2020. Okay. That's fire station number 1. So some of our health initiatives. So one of our priorities has been and continues to be the health and wellness of our firefighters. And we have worked on a lot of collaboration this year in particular. And one of the ones that I'm really proud of, in November, we are partnered with Sports Cardiology BC. They are coming free of charge to the city of Nanaimo. And we are the first department in British Columbia who will be having cardiac testing for all of our staff. It's led by a team of researchers from Sports Cardiology, from UBC and VGH. Over 40% of firefighter deaths on duty, active duty, are related to heart attacks and cardiac arrests. So we're pretty proud that they've chosen Nanaimo as the first department that they've offered to come and test. We are also continuing to work on our mental health and wellness initiatives. This year, we've partnered and purchased or made available for all of our staff, anybody that wants it, a Headspace, which is really just a meditation app. Any opportunity we have to be able to keep our members at work and our staff at work is the best result. We've completed our Resilient Minds training. And again, we continue to partner with the city, with our occupational health and safety, as well as with the IFF, Fire Chiefs Associations, and any agency that's willing to help on mental health. And if anybody noticed on the weekend, they opened up Honor House in BC, which is part of a ranch for first responders suffering from PTSD. So that's the health and wellness. It's kind of a good story. So I want to take you back a little bit on some of council's policies. Some of you may have been on council when these policies came into effect, and others may not have. So we have a policy of 4-member engines. And why do we need 4-member engines? Not only is it NFPA standards, it's really all about safety and first response. So WorkSafe has a 2-in, 2-out requirement. So if 2 people go into a fire, 2 people have to be available on scene in order to rescue them. And really, it's about having the amount of resources on scene in a timely manner. So not only do we just need 4 members at a structure fire, the minimum numbers nowadays recommended are closer to 14. And thank you for supporting us with additional staffing last year, which actually they were hired in July. And again, response times. So what are those response times? First arrival in an emergency incident in 6 minutes or less to 90% of our incidents. So if you think about that, from the time that that phone is answered until the time they jump on the trucks and get out that door to be on scene within 6 minutes. So you have a minute to put on your turnout gear and 4 minutes to travel. And we've actually been working really well with our partners in the GIS department to help with some of our mapping on our response times and looking at the actual data coming out of our fire department and from our responding apparatus. And again, the arrival of our first alarm, 12 firefighters within 10 minutes for 90%. And we're doing pretty good on that one. So those are the council policies that we have in place. And now we're going to go back and talk a little bit about the different type of responses that fire departments go to. So like many others, when people don't know who to call, they're going to call the fire department. Not only do we go to structure fires, we go to brush fires, we go to water rescues. We've had several of those this year. All the MVIs, motor vehicle incidents, medical calls, technical space, hazardous materials, extrication, people that are trapped in machinery, down power lines, ice rescues, steep slope, carbon monoxide, public assistance, people trapped in elevators. And basically, if it's not a police call, the fire department will probably be notified. And we have burning complaints and everything else like that too. But it's just probably one of the things to note about this is we're training for all of these different responses that we're going to as well. So our calls for service. So generally, they've been increasing year over year up until 2018. And we don't have a full year this year, but we're going to be slightly less this year. And what does that change? And we'll talk a little bit about it. BC Ambulance has made some changes, and as anybody recalls, you've been at UBCM, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But generally speaking, our calls for service have been increasing, the same as police, the same as ambulance, the same as building development permits, and everywhere else in our city. And how are we doing with our council policies? Well, here's where we're at. We're actually arriving on scene a bit slower. So 73% of our incidents are arriving within 6 minutes. And we measure it and we report on it monthly to our crews. And you'll be able to see in a few minutes why. But the good news is 90% of our structure fires, we are making the standard. We're at 95% of having our 10 firefighters or 3 apparatus on scene within 10 minutes, or 12 firefighters. We're going to have those few odd ones that trying to, if resources are tied up at another incident or on the outer fringes, we may not get there within 10 minutes, but we are making the industry standard for that. So it's called NFPA 1710, requires the first apparatus to arrive on the scene of an incident within 4 minutes of travel time, 90%, with 4 firefighters per company. So based on the distribution of calls, you can see the highlighted area, station 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are calls that are outside of that 4-minute response times. And we use 2 separate modeling techniques. We use the actual average speeds of our apparatus and the posted speeds. And there's no possible way that we can make 90% of the incidents in 6 minutes. I don't want you to change that standard because it's risky to change that standard. But what we do know is that 20% of our calls fall outside of our first due-in areas. And you asked me about Station 6 or Hammond Bay Station. I'm going to tell you right here now that it won't make that much difference, the percentage of calls in that area. And we've done some other research. So again, when council made the decision to take Station 6 off the books, there may be better locations for other fire stations.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Mayor Crowe?
Thanks very much. That's been talked about for a very long time. I'm conscious of the politics of it, and I'm looking at the map, which is very helpful. Thank you. And I'm just wondering, those are all calls, right?
Correct.
So it's not fire necessarily. That could be the heart attack. That could be the accident. That could be the cat caught up the tree.
It's all code 3, so anywhere we went lights and sirens, so they are emergency calls, they're not non-emergency calls.
Okay, so all emergency calls, but looking at that, it's quite dramatic. I mean, expanded Station 1 would look like the more sensible thing to do, or making sure we had the bodies there, and I'm quite surprised at the distribution, actually.
It's really interesting, you see where Dale's been developing areas, right, as our city grows. And the higher population, it's always got to be a Dale. As the populations grow in different areas and our community grows outward and grows upward, we're going to see more calls in those areas as well.
Councilor Brown?
So what you're saying is sprawl costs us in terms of fire service delivery?
Found grasp of the argument.
Sorry for the interruption. Carry on.
That's all right. That's all right. It's all good. Trying to lighten the mood here. So again, our distribution of calls per service, and we do hear publicly, oh, the fire department never goes to fires anymore. It's because we're doing such a great job with our public education and our building code, but there's still fires, and we still need responses. And you guys know recently, it seems like we've had a rash of structure fires. So we go to a whole different type of incidents, and we've kind of grouped them into medical, motor vehicle, fire incidents, which are included like vehicle fires, burning complaints, alarms ringing. And assistance, hazardous materials, that's another one that's going to continue to grow, and mutual aid to our neighboring jurisdictions.
Sorry to interrupt again. but
Anytime.
Counselor- I'm not the one that's interrupting you, it's Counselor.
You show that you have 0% mutual aid. How many mutual aid agreements do we have?
We have mutual aid agreements through the chair, mutual aid agreements with all of our neighboring jurisdictions. So there are, anybody got off the top of their head?
Plattsville, Cranberry, North Cedar,
Sanamo?
Extension, we provide services to Nanaimo, yes.
Automatic.
What about the airport?
The airport, no.
Outside,
No mutual aid?
outside of our, yeah. And we have a contract area regional district in Nanaimo as well, in the north, Chincoteague area.
So we are in the process of working through our mutual aid agreements as well with all of our neighboring jurisdictions and everybody in that hits our boundaries, including Extension.
Please carry on.
Okay, so 66% of the calls we go to are medical calls. And interestingly enough, cardiac-related calls. So this is going to go back a little bit on our service delivery plan. We know that BC Ambulance is downloading only those incidents right now that are considered the most critical, where early intervention is key to the outcomes. Our 2016 to 2018 service delivery plan identified cardiac-related incidents as a key initiative to having positive outcomes, resulting from training and usage of bystander CPR and AED. So this year, our crews, up to July 31st, have attended 88 cardiac-related incidents in our town, and everybody knows that if it's coming as a cardiac, it's probably pretty serious. And given the likelihood of surviving falls by 10 percentage points every minute, it's exceedingly crucial for any bystander to administer CPR and use AED as quick as possible. So that is why it's critical that we're taking initiatives of training people in bystander CPR. Now here's a long slide. So we are being downloaded CPR-related calls and cardiac-related calls, but there have been some changes to the first responder program. And I'm not here to talk disparately about BC Ambulance because we're all part of the pre-hospital care in our province and in our city. And so we need to work together in order to deliver the best health care and have the best outcomes. So in 2018, when we saw that sudden downturn in number of first responder calls, BC EHS implemented a new call response model. And really what it is, instead of having, anybody might have heard BLS before, which sends one car code 2, and maybe a fire engine code 2, or an ALS, which is a code 3 car, and an advanced life support car. They switched it to color coding. And they've recoded them all from purple being the most severe down to blue. Previously, first responders would have attended a lot of the yellow calls because sometimes you don't really know what you're going to until you arrive on scene. The information in any emergency is only as good as the caller on the other end. So the CRM replaced the resource allocation plan. It was called a RAP back in the day, which assumes ambulance transport for every patient. They are working towards a treat and release program with provincial health that is yet to be put through, but it was given ministerial approval previously. The coding with some similarities to the color systems in many of the hospitals. So it has 6 categories, they assign resources to it. So really, they did an independent report, and what you might remember, if anybody was at UBCM last week, there was probably a motion on the floor to allow local governments to discern what level of pre-hospital care they want to provide. This has been going on for several years where fire departments and municipalities offer all different levels of response. And we have, I think the main issue on the mainland is that they get pulled out of their communities quite a bit. And we sometimes see that here, especially in the evening hours and in the night hours. So previously what happens, and sometimes you'll hear from your community, that the first responders, there's fire trucks and there's ambulance. I call for an ambulance, I get a fire truck as well. And why is that? Well, in Nanaimo, we arrive on scene. This is our data, our crews track data. We're a data-driven organization. 65% of the time for at least 1 minute before ambulance arrives, and 48% of the time for more than 3 minutes before ambulance arrives. So could we make any difference with a higher level of care? So currently we're first responder, all of our firefighters. Some people, when they come to us, they're trained at a higher level, and we have to, through the licensing board, they have to drop down to a lower level of first responder. That's also one of the other requests through UBCM, is to allow you to practice to your current level. So an EMR is a higher training level of support. We can use pulse oximeters, and pulse oximeters are critical in detecting cardiac-related incidents as well. You don't want too much oxygen, so a lot of times under first responder, first thing you do is you always give people oxygen. Sometimes it's not the case. Some number like 94% pulse ox. Am I right there? We can provide better care in the hot zone. So hot zone would be our working fire zones, over the bank entrenchment rescues, anywhere else where ambulance will not either be permitted to go or won't go, and really even in the scene of a critical motor vehicle accident. A certification is less frequently. Currently, we recertify every 3 years, and we're working through a mandate right now of criminal record checks at that same time period, and EMR is every 5 years. I believe our firefighters across the province feel that if they have a higher level of training, it gives them the confidence to do the job and don't feel like they're just holding somebody's hand on the side. And there has been evidence, and what I'm going to request, you'll be getting this in a full report down the road. There has been evidence that current models like Delta are doing a better job. And we hear that through a study through the University of the Fraser Valley. We've seen many fire departments on the island, including Campbell River. Victoria, I believe, may be working to some. Saanich. The North Shore Fire Departments are starting to train up. Nelson, Delta, and other areas in Vancouver is going to start working towards slowly putting higher level care on their apparatus, not all at once. So we did some calculations on what it would cost, but recognize we're not within the budget process. I was a little late to the party for that one. So what we're going to ask is if there's an opportunity where we can come back later and provide a more fulsome report to council on the benefits or really on the emergency medical responder. It's a different licensing fee. We still would go to the same calls, but provide a higher level of service to our community. So that's recommendation number 1. Okay. If somebody was on the roof of that building and they needed medical help, we would be able to provide it to them and provide a lot more assistance to them at a higher level of care. I'm going to guess that's the Beacon. So our current fire plan, I want to tell you a little bit about, if anybody was around, I think Councillor Thorpe and Armstrong were here. It was a 10 to 15-year overall plan, and it came as direction from council. And we do 3-year service delivery plans where we talk about what our initiatives are going to be over 3 years. The difficulty with it to manage is that we can't plan for long-term strategic planning in a 3-year segment, especially when it comes to something like future fire stations. Go ahead.
Sorry, we have
Yeah.
Councilor Gessenbrock has a question.
Thank you, Chair, through you, Chief Fry. I wonder if I could just get a little bit more clarity on the EMR and the situation with BC Ambulance. It's definitely one of those areas that there seems to be something stuck, and there seems to be some redundancy, and I don't know if it's turf war or what, but I would really like to be able to support it resolving, and I know it might take a larger discussion, and I know that it's difficult when our crews show up and they can't provide the level of service and they're standing stuck watching. It's awful, and that needs to change. But can you give a little bit more background on where sort of things are doubling up and where we potentially need to be moving towards, you know, down the line, and maybe some advocacy with the province or that with BC Ambulance to sort of sort out the jurisdictional issues?
Through the chair. So probably jurisdictionally, it's been an ongoing discussion since the 70s when BC Ambulance was formed. If that was in the year that it was formed, 1974 is in my head for some reason. And first responders and the level of support. I think overall, and in our community in Nanaimo, our paramedics and our firefighters work exceptionally well together. There is a huge amount of respect for the work that each other does, and really no fire departments across the province want to be paramedics. We don't want to transport patients to the hospital, but we want to be able to provide the best level of service we can. So if your question is, you know, the turf war, there needs to be more further advocacy, and there are ongoing discussions at higher levels. I know I sit on the board for the Fire Chiefs Association, and we have been working with EMA Licensing Board, who will say they're independent of the provincial, the BC Ambulance, but they are under the provincial government. And their goal and their idea, when we spoke with Patricia Lane a few weeks ago, she said in her idea, in her world, if every firefighter would have EMR, it would make her job a lot easier, because it's one license. And then there's not going to be this cross-jurisdictional issue. Most paramedics are trained to higher levels than EMR, so they're PCP, primary care paramedics, or advanced care paramedics. So it's really just about upping the level from standard first aid to first responder to EMR. I know in Delta, if you ask any of the firefighters there, one of the situations I heard recently was by the time the ambulance comes, they've already done their blood pressure check and their pulse ox and done their first set of vitals, full set of vitals. So when ambulance arrives on scene, they can actually package that person and get them to the hospital quicker. So there will be ongoing discussions provincially, and I would expect that we're going to see movement towards the end of the year coming out of UBCM and some of the initiatives of the UBCM.
I guess my question is, like, are we getting calls for medical, like, is it necessary to have a giant fire truck show up for somebody having a, you know, an issue, a cardiac issue or whatever? Are we getting those calls, or like, what's going on there?
Okay, through the chair. So the initial call, if you're in Hammond Bay or out by Dover Bay, and you're having a cardiac related, you're going to get a fire engine with 4 firefighters arrive on scene, and they'll probably be there for 3 to 5 minutes under most situations before ambulance arrives. If you are downtown, you may get a 2-person rescue unit arrive. So when we have staffing available and extra staffing downtown, we will send our 2-man engine. Our rescue unit will be the first one out. If we have 6 firefighters on duty, they will respond first to the medical calls. Many municipalities are opening up med rescue units or medical units in their high areas where they're performing a lot of medical responses. But the reason we have to send 4 is that at any time we could be rerouted or respond directly from that medical to a fire. So it's our minimum staff. Does that answer your question or not really?
Yeah, a little bit. I was just looking at 65% of the calls are medical, and just being efficient with the resources that we do have, and if there's anything that can be addressed there. Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong.
Is it Winnipeg that's now putting paramedics as firemen as well? Is that something that the BC should be looking at, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think the higher level of training, and like you say, we are responding to 66% of our calls are medical related, let alone the motor vehicle accidents, so the higher level of care. In my future vision, it'd be great to have a nurse on the fire engine. I don't know, but that's my 20-year strategic plan, maybe, down the road. But not everybody has to have that same level, but definitely higher levels. And you're right, Winnipeg has that model. They're running the paramedics on their trucks as well. And Vancouver is going to a higher level as well, especially in the downtown area.
Thank you.
Carry on, thank you.
Okay, so again, I think the problem with we kind of talked about the service delivery plans, and it's really difficult to build up the resources going forward. And I did have a little bit about, I did have a slide that I hid. Oh, it's on yours. If you printed it, it talks about the fire propagation. And really what we know, years ago, a fire would reach this thing called flashover in 30 minutes. Now with new construction and all the stuff people have put in their homes, that's happening in 5 minutes. So the fires are burning hotter. And we used to say that people would have 5 minutes to escape a fire. Now it's down to 2 minutes.
Mayor Crowe?
Thank you. When you said stuff people put in their homes, you're not talking about furniture against the method of construction? Is that fair to say, or was it both, or can you comment?
Yeah, through the chair, it's the materials that your furniture's made out of, it's the vinyl siding in the houses, it's the,
It's mostly
Chief Norman?
It's mostly the fuel or the synthetic furnishings now. They're all synthetic, synthesized from oil, so the propagation rate is exponential based on the fuel. And then the toxicity of the gases is it's not so much the heat, it's the gases that are getting people quick. The gas production is so fast.
So in fairness, if I may through the chair, it's not so much the construction, it's literally what we eat off of and what we sit in.
we could talk about the environment. Right?
Thank you.
Oh, I missed that one. So community education. So remember we were talking about cardiac-related incidents. So here's some good news. Between 2017, from January to July of this year, in 2019, we arrived on scene at 130 incidents where somebody was performing bystander CPR. So those people probably made a difference in the outcome of that person. At least gave them a fighting chance. So this is what we do. We track our data, and we think that it's important, because why would we know what we need to continue to educate and train people on if we don't know what we're going to? In our 2016 to 2018 service delivery plan, we committed to training the community on bystander CPR and AED. Our City of Nanaimo staff, including all new employees, were given an opportunity. We were out at Mr. Sims' Public Works Yard training. We provide training every year, including this year and next year, to our high schools. And we did a fire station open house where anybody in the community that was out at Station 4 could come and learn bystander CPR. We trained over 500 students last year alone. So one of the other things for 2019 to 2021, we've been working with SNUNAMO, with the chief there, on the importance of bystander CPR. And we want to train their community on it as well. And we're also going to be engaging VIU, because there's a lot of people that go back into our communities out there, along with every other opportunity we're continuing to work on. This is our good news story. So smoke alarm programs. So one of our objectives was to reduce the frequency of structure fires through targeted public outreach, education, and reduce the harms fire cause. So in 2017, we knocked on 785 doors. 2018, 1,249 residentials, and then we also went to Snuneymuxw. So as Councillor Armstrong asked earlier, if we respond there, we actually have an agreement for contracted service. So we provide them the same level of service to their community as to ours, to IR1. And it made a difference. We actually went door to door with a member of their community and reached out to those individuals. And moving forward, if anybody's been watching the news, mobile home parks, I did this slideshow a few weeks ago. So we've identified 1,600 mobile home parks in the city of Nanaimo. They're strategically are really placed throughout the whole community, so that way each of our fire stations can do some outreach in that area. Chances are they're seniors. Seniors are the second highest, or the highest rate of dying in fires per age group. Because most of the time they're not aware of smoke alarms. When they were younger, they weren't required to be in their homes, and they really don't know that they need to be replaced every 10 years. You guys all know that, but not necessarily all the other seniors. I'm kidding. I'm not looking at anybody in particular.
What'd she say?
So we just started this last week, leading up to Fire Prevention Week, and Thursday and Friday, we're entering our data into our system because we like to track where we've gone and what we've done. We visited so far 255 mobile homes, and we've installed 50 smoke alarms.
Can I just ask a quick question with regard to smoke alarms? Is there a recommendation of battery operated versus hardwired?
So any house built after 2012 requires hardwired smoke alarms. If your house was built before the code, it's the code of the day. But the battery operated ones that are interconnected with hard wire, so they're hardwired with a battery backup, is the best, right? So if your power goes out, the battery's going to keep it going as long as you change your battery. The ones that we are handing out actually have tamper-proof batteries. A lot of the times if people have battery-operated smoke alarms, they take the battery out so they don't work. So they don't belong in the kitchen, but really outside on every level outside of the bedrooms. The new code actually requires them to be built in or put in each sleeping room. There you go. The Office of the Fire Commissioner is also targeting this year, I'm sure we're going to get in and assist on that, on the importance of carbon monoxide detectors, the silent killer. So there'll be a release coming out in November on that. And then I'm also heading to Victoria on Wednesday to launch Fire Prevention Week with on the steps of the legislature, so that'll be fun. The smoke alarms have been one of my key initiatives for years. I spent a lot of time in prevention in previous roles, and when you see the difference, we've been to a lot of fires this year where the smoke alarms aren't working, and some people are very fortunate to have escaped. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Viera. Has anybody heard about Viera? There you go. So Viera is a Vancouver Island Emergency Response Academy. Originally, when it was started, it was partnered with VIU. We have taken it in-house, and we are one of 4 accredited agencies in British Columbia that trains firefighters. So we use it as not only to help offset our budget, but also to train other fire departments across the province. And we've been running it off the side of, with other related duties off the side of a desk, I'd like to say. But Assistant Chief Ms. Surrier has been doing a fantastic job with it lately. So between 2016 and 2018, we've actually had, these are order of magnitude, but $1.5 million in revenue through that agency. Previously, we were transferring that money to reserves. And then in 2018, it's actually offsetting our fire department budget. So our fire department budget would be a lot larger if it wasn't for the revenues coming in from Viera. And we're also continuing to work with our firefighters to develop in-house training as opposed to using contractors, we hire contractors in to do a lot of the training right now. So it's really important to us to provide leadership and development within our own employees as well going forward. Excellent. So it's a great, it's very similar to the Justice Institute, anybody knows that. So one of the other things I just want to talk about, some of the growth and service. Traditionally, we talked about the next fire station would be located in Hammond Bay, and it was taken off the table in 2015 after there was conflicting information on where exactly it should be. I think the spot of land might not have been the right area. So we've done some recent research. We did some analysis in-house here, as well as our partners have also done some information, and we're getting various recommendations on a better location for the next fire station and when that would be. Because we need to take that into consideration, what our future growth is in the city and be part of the OCP. And it's the spread. I actually have spread across the city. So as buildings are going up and we have the taller buildings moving out to the north end of town, and we need to take that into consideration of being able to get our 3 engines on scene in the event of an emergency. And again, we're going to be working towards our city map layouts and reviewing all of our analytics for that. And it's big. It's not just so easy as in the day saying, well, I think this is a great location. We got a piece of land here. We want to put any future growth or any future fire stations need to be in the right place. So unfortunately, I'm not a data analyst. So what we're hoping for is that we can hire somebody or have a contract to create more of a master plan for the fire department. In 2004, they did a 10-year plan, and it really looked at a future growth over the 10 to 20 years. I guess it was 10 years. And that's where Station 4 came into flux. So we'd like to do something like that going forward again. And I'm getting to the end, really. So some of the pressures and some of the focus. So we would have a lot of pressure. People always want to tour a fire station, right? People phone, they'd come and do birthday parties. It's like open house all of the time. But that, unfortunately, we are having to leave for calls. It would impact their training. So now we're going to try to focus more on those open houses and those community events where we invite the community into a station on a given time. So back in the day, if anybody remembers the old fire fair days, but we'd like to do that more community-centered and let the people get to know their fire station and show them some of our initiatives. So show them, teach them about bystander CPR, not just let them climb through a fire truck. We get a lot of requests for service. Again, people want fire engines at every event. Industry, we don't have full-time, a truck on the side for full-time pub ed, so we fit it into our day and response. So a lot of times we'll be at an event and then we'll leave for an emergency. Industry standards, they're changing all the time. Work safe regulations, even when it comes down to how we clean our clothes and how often you clean your clothes and the type of apparatus or the breathing apparatus that you're wearing and what that minimum requirement is, it changes all the time. And it actually becomes a bit more complex and stringent, the requirements put on. But I think it's, in the end, it's really about keeping our firefighters safe. So decontaminating after incidents, which takes more time, and cleaning their gear after every incident. Mental health and wellness, again, is it keys to be a priority for us. The fire propagation, right? Doubling fire grows quicker, so we need to get on scene. Our wildland interface, and we'll be coming to you shortly with some information for fire smart communities. And as well, continue to fill our incident command. So instead of just 4 people showing on scene, we need to make sure we build proper incident command at every incident we're at. And what about council? So we didn't want to forget about you and what some of your key initiatives were, and really everyone thinks about the fire department and is it any good for the environment because we have these big diesel trucks going down the road. Well, every time we put out a fire, we're saving the air. And we're committed so you guys are committed to saving lives and property, and so are we. And keeping a reduction and keeping the fire spread low every time we have a brush fire and we lose our trees. So it's about fire smarting our community. It's about responding quickly to those incidents. And we're going to continue to look at ways every time we run a new initiative or purchase a new vehicle, if there's some smarter way we can do it in order to have less impact on the environment. So again, we're going to look with a lens on the environment and energy savings every chance that we get, which is a little bit different for fire service, but we're going to continue to do that. So in closing, just to fall back, what I'm going to ask today is that you allow us maybe to perform or to come back to you with a report on a business case or a report to council on the benefits of EMR. Transitioning to an EMR, and it's not all at once. That we allow the fire department master plan be included in budget discussions and what that would look like. That you allow us to continue with our public education and outreach. Or tell me what else you want me to be doing that we're not doing already.
Thank you, Chief Fry. We do have 3 councillors' questions, starting with Councillor Martman, Kesselbrecht, and Armstrong. One Bonner.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to move the recommendation that council direct staff to prepare a report for council on transitioning pre-hospital care up to EMR.
Second, Councillor Hammonds.
And I think it speaks for itself, right? The better training that they have, the more confidence they have, and absolutely, we should be moving on this as soon as we can, so I look forward to a staff report.
Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Bonner?
Well, do we want to have questions, but I mean, not particularly on that.
Okay, well, then let's get that motion dealt with first, and then we'll go back to questions. So the motion on the floor is, again, please repeat it.
First recommendation.
For council to direct staff to prepare a report for council on transitioning pre-hospital care up to EMR.
And it was seconded by Councillor Hammonds. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, now we'll go back to the order of speakers. Councillors Gesselbrecht, Armstrong, and Bonner. In that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the speed in which buildings are burning. Over how long has that increase been happening? And is there data like on the loss of life as a resulting of changing materials?
I'm going to refer to Deputy Chief Norman. He probably can comment on the growth and where that's come from about loss of life. I'm not sure if we have much information on that.
Yeah, so it was based on the past 30 years of fire growth data versus the present 30 years. So it became a concern down in the U.S., line of duty deaths to actual firefighters. What they found is that the line of duty deaths have stayed the same in the last 30 years to the current 30 years. Created a study from the UL and NIST, and what they found is that although the rate of occurrence has gone down because of fire prevention, the actual line of duty deaths of firefighters stayed consistent. So the question was why? And what they found out was the synthetic fuel loads and also the lightweight construction of the buildings. So that synthetic fuel loads increased the flashover, the rate at which a fire grows, and then the light construction increased the time of collapse.
Okay, then we have Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chief Fry. When you were here, I think it was in July, we talked about that there's some work-safe mandated equipment. Is that going to be included in your budget? Because if it's mandated, you have to do it. And I think it was, we're looking at, what was it, 800,000?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong. It is a recommendation from WorkSafe, and we are about two versions back behind that. But I do believe that it is being discussed and will be included in the 2020 to 2024 budget. I'm not sure if that's kind of where we're at.
Follow up on that, do we actually have that much time, or is WorkSafe going to start finding us if something's to happen to somebody? That's a big concern I have, because usually WorkSafe recommendations mean you need to do them ASAP, or if you don't, then we're going to be liable to, I would imagine, lawsuits if it's not done.
I haven't, through the chair, I haven't spoken to WorkSafe, and I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have that background information. They still meet the minimum standards, but we do need to upgrade them, and sooner than later. But if we keep repairing them, it's just a matter of pretty soon we're not going to be able to repair them either. I think that's probably where we're at.
Do you recall what the cost was?
I believe it was close to 750.
I thought I said 800,000. Okay, thank you.
Would a clarity from Council
You
Barnard?
guys are talking about equipment, but was this the air tanks that was discussed previously? Okay.
Yeah. Self-contained breathing apparatus.
Next, we have Councilor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I wrote all my questions there. I thought the Chair didn't like interruptions as much, so. So I'm going to kind of start at the beginning of it, right? When you talked about the time to get to a fire or an emergency, you're traveling down roads. Now, we're putting up LED lights, and these lights have the ability to have modules attached to them. Are you familiar or aware of any places in North America where they're actually diverting traffic from lanes that the fire trucks have to go down through managing lighting in that lights and traffic lights?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. Previously, we had a traffic study in Surrey where they could open all the lights to actually get traffic flowing ahead of the game. They have full-time people managing their light systems. That was something they were working on there in order to get the proper flow of traffic so it keeps it going. I believe they do it in a lot of communities across North America.
We don't do it here on this. Do you think it would be necessary? Do we not have enough traffic?
We have the lights.
We have preemption that actually get the lights changed, so they will go green, but it's not, and we do have emergency evacuation routes in the event of a major emergency or evacuation. Chief Norman, did you have something?
Just the preemption
Yeah.
lights, they're siren activated. They work
They're excellent.
80% of the time, maybe.
My other question is, I'm not sure if you can answer this, but why are ambulance slower, considering they already have a minute ahead of you because they're not jumping into uniforms?
You don't have to answer that.
I would probably suggest that we have resources that are strategically placed a lot more throughout the city, and our fire stations are located throughout the city in order to optimize our responses. So they currently have a station downtown. A lot of times they'll be at the hospital or at the station off of Mostar Road. So we're just a bit closer to the incident.
Okay.
Councilor Bonner, can I just let Councilor Hemmings, she has a comment about your last question.
Just that, one of the things I think I learned at UBCM is that BC Ambulance serves a bigger geography. So if one or more of the ambulances are out of the geography, then it just takes a longer to get there.
Okay.
Carry on.
Thank you. Now, I was quite interested in about your burnover rate, or what's it? Flashover rate. So we should actually, do we have any education on the books or helping out people to suggest that they should get back to more than basic construction like leather and horsehair? This seems that would take a lot less time to burn and not kill you on your way out.
I think one of our key public education messages is close the door behind you. So what happens is when people walk out of a room, they leave the door open, and then the fire spreads and all the smoke goes and burns quicker. So at least by closing the door behind them or sleep with their door closed, it will stop the spread of fire a lot quicker. But I don't know if we've had anything on.
It's pretty hard to tell industry not to make things out of plastic. And of course, in the building construction end of it, it's lightweight construction equals more dollars for developers, right? Because it's less expensive to produce produce it en masse, right? So we're always last at the table when it comes to the code stuff, right? And we're seen as the bad guys because we're always trying to push the safety end, which ends up costing money. So I don't see that slowing down anytime quicker. And then the other part of that is densification. It's not just the house, because of the fire rate propagation, the increase. It's not just the house that's involved, it's the neighboring houses that we really have to worry about now.
One more, something that really tweaked my interest. Can you have birthday parties at the fire hall? Did you said something? Because that would be a huge fundraiser for some
For
people.
yourself?
No, not me.
Don's birthday next.
It wasn't untrue. People would phone and see about coming and doing a tour on, and so we just had to really tighten that and think about, you know, a good use of our firefighters' day would be training and inspections and responding to calls, so.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Chief Fry, for the informative presentation.
Point process, there was 3 other recommendations delivered, are we?
Oh, we need those? Okay.
Move all through, they're not motions, really.
The recommendations, the recommendations.
There's just 2.
Oh, these ones in there, okay.
Oh, sorry, count that.
Okay, my apologies. So on page 38, there's service level request.
14 on your iPads.
Clerk Crowe.
Do I read this as being recommendations that require notice of motion? Do I read this as budgetary discussion for senior management to bring recommendations back to council? I'm looking at Mr. Rudolph, through you, Chair.
Yes, through the chair, Mayor Crowe, the subject of the costing and funding support for the study, how much it is, when it is, and all that should be part of the overall budget considerations as part of that budget process, because there's quite a few of those coming forward. So I think you'll just see that unless you wanted to expedite that, have a discussion about how much that costs and what today, which you really don't have any information in front of you, the business case will be provided for you in budget. And you'll have more chance to discuss that. This is just getting this is a general overview today, so I don't think you can necessarily make that decision at this time. I would, again, as first heard deferred, saying that, but I think it's one of those things where you benefit from hearing a little bit more about that and where are the budget options available for you. So, you know, going forward, so you don't have to make a motion on it.
So I'm looking for direction.
Chair, I believe the recommendation that you've already passed is good enough for today, and that the second and third one, that the fire department master plan be included in the budget discussions, that, as Mr. Rudolph has suggested, is already happening. And that council directs staff to continue with their public education programs. You could move that, but I think that goes without saying. So it's just for information at this point. And then the last one was council provide other direction, which I think Chief Fry is on course. So I don't believe there's any further recommendations.
So I wasn't that far off the mark, actually.
Some trains.
So unless there's any further discussion, questions, comments, thank you very much, Chief Fry, and the rest of your staff. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda. Governance and Priorities Committee agenda planning.
We have the addition.
Go ahead.
Well, this is where I'd like to talk about the Public Safety Task Force, as Councilor Brown said earlier, this would be the time to have that discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
I just think it's really important. I think our community's feeling the stress. I think there's some stuff that could be recommended from the community that we may not think about, gives them a way to be involved. And I'm not saying that it be a committee. I believe the task force is more appropriate for what we're dealing with. It could be even like recommendations that we advocate from our Crown prosecutors. Somebody said, what can we be looking at? That would be something they might look at. Or, advocate for, when we talk about the safe consumption sites, they may have ideas around the crime that comes with that. We may change people's minds based on what comes from those recommendations. So I think it'd be really important to have the public at the table to hear all those things that we're looking at and bring their perspective forward. Even goes so far as when we talk about public safety isn't just a criminal, it's also like, with the fire department, when it says, maybe they make recommendations, don't buy certain types of equipment or whatever. So I just think it's an important discussion to have. I think that, from my takeaway from the meeting that we're all at is that people really want a place to voice their concerns to council other than email, and right now that doesn't exist.
Thank you. So next on the agenda, speaker is Councilor Hazelwood.
I'll pass.
You pass.
Yeah.
Oh, you're like so easy for me. Councilor Mayor Crowe.
Thanks very much. I mean, look, I think it's obviously a worthwhile topic to talk about, but let me just throw a few things out before we get too fully engaged in this concept. Firstly, looking at the jurisdictional issues, we are attempting already with the housing and health task force to examine the broader issues that are plaguing our community, which frankly have led to much of the discussion that led to the old Caprice Theatre being filled the other night. Do we need a task force? Would the task force be able to actually do anything except provide a venue for people to be heard? Would a town hall or a series of town halls do the same thing? How much do we need to delve into the community? Are we, the questions we should be asking of council? I mean, frankly, if it's public health and safety, we've just heard a wonderful report from Chief Fry. It seems to me the fire department seems to be well in control of its mandate and its responsibilities to this community, conscious of where the fires are, where the call-outs are, etc. Is this just a political solution to give the appearance that we're doing something about areas over which, in many respects, we have no control? And first, I'll point to Crown Council with great respect. In terms of policing, is it time to have Superintendent Miller give a more fulsome report to council around issues relating to crime and have the kind of statistics we need to discuss these things? Absolutely. Do we have any control over social assistance rates, which, publicly in my previous life, and I can still continue to argue, are ridiculously low in comparison to the purchasing power that social assistance rates used to have in this province, which helped contribute to the affordability crisis and all the things that relate to community health. I come back, Crown Council, we don't hire, fire, or have any control whatsoever over Crown Council and decisions. We don't have any control over criminal justice. We don't have control over parole. We don't run the prisons. We don't provide public housing. We don't staff the housing. We don't do all of those things. And so as much as I appreciate it's a worthwhile and important topic for the community, I'm reminded that we do have to stick to our knitting and do those things that we can do. Am I in favor of having discussion about this and what it would look like and whether or not we could do anything that's significantly useful, keeping in mind that we have limited resources? And I state quite bluntly, I'm already hearing rumors about perhaps our proposed revenue increases based on what we'd sort of set out as our 4-year budget plan may not be realistic in light of costs that are being driven up the community. So I want to take, if you will forgive the language, a fairly conservative approach on these things before we start to paraphrase the CBC riding off madly in all directions. I want to know, is this a task force? What's the evidence? What are we hoping to achieve? There's a number of things which I think point very wisely to a further and perhaps more fulsome discussion with the assistance of staff at a further GPC. But I'm certainly not anxious to see any motions passed today. First heard deferred, as Mr. Rudolph has pointed out wisely again. I am concerned about us again appearing to take on responsibilities for things over which we have no control, and with great respect, not a significant level of advocacy, because these problems are literally across the board in the province. Denial situation, concerns around whether sentencing is appropriate, whether or not people are falling through the cracks, whether there's a level of criminality associated with addiction and addictive behavior, etc. All of those things. We're the municipal government here. And we've already taken a significant step with the good work of Councillors Hemmons and Bonner on this issue. And so again, I argue strongly in favor of a fulsome discussion but not to be committing ourselves to things over which we will not have much control, nor frankly much impact potentially, except for the fact that we'll draw attention to the fact that we haven't achieved too much. And from a crass political perspective, I'm not anxious to be the whipping boy for something when I can't provide a solution.
Thank you. Our next is Councillor Evans, followed by Brown and Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Armstrong that this is a really important conversation for our community right now. I think the meeting last Tuesday really drove that home for all of us. I think we very intentionally and purposely restructured our governance model so that we can have these conversations as a council with staff involved, perhaps invite in some experts. So rather than going off on developing a committee because we identify a problem, we could probably identify 5 committees today if that were the case. I'd like Mayor Crow, I'd like to see this come to a GPC for a really full discussion. And if a task force or a committee emerges from that, then that's the right process.
Okay, next we have Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Brown. Sorry. Another B after.
I agree wholeheartedly, like I said, with the sentiment. I think we need to have a robust conversation about this. Whether a committee emerges is the appropriate response, I don't know. But I do think I would like to see a conversation around how do we create space for the task force to allow it to fulfill its mandate without additional pressures that are so tempting to put onto it. I think I disagree a little bit with his worship on that. I don't see our role as just sitting idly while our community is being damaged. I think we need to enable and create space for people to be heard, and potentially community-driven solutions rise. But I also think our advocacy efforts need to be there for our community. I don't think we should raise property taxes and solve this problem ourselves by any means. That's not sustainable or is feasible, but I do think as those closest to the people, we have a responsibility to make their voices heard and direct them to the levels of government that can. And I'm a firm believer that those that make the most noise get what they need for their community. So I welcome the conversation and I welcome the debate that I had that day if we choose to schedule it.
No, Councillor.
Yep, no, I want to echo that. I do think a really robust GPC discussion is warranted. I would like to have, police officers here, whatever, as well. And, and I disagree with his worship on some things because I do think some of the stuff we can affect, which is zoning. We saw that with the safe consumption site. Like, we know crime goes up significantly around them. So that is something we do have control over. Needle exchange, that's another thing we have control over. It's not necessarily something we want to go to, but those are issues we do have control over. So I would look forward to a really robust discussion on this at a GPC.
Councillor Warner, then Gilles.
Thank you, Chair. What I got out of the meeting that happened last week was that people really want to have a place where they can say what's on their minds, right? A place, not so much to vent, but to come together and come up with solutions, right, that they want. And at Town Hall, I think this type of meeting, I think, worked well because it did 2 things. Most people came out of there knowing that most of the problems aren't under our jurisdiction. They are provincial, and poor MLA Sheila Malcolmson wrote that pretty well. And they are federal, and they have to deal with the criminal court system, which is way out of our control. But I think people need to be able to get together to have a conversation about these things, right? And what's affecting them. And there's lots of suggestions out there that we could probably get from the community that we probably never get from the task force. So I think we should be looking at ways, as Councillor Brown just suggests, finding ways for people can have their say or get their voices heard.
Councillor Gilles.
I agree that we need to have a full discussion on this, and I don't know if we need to move to have a GPC focused on public safety and how council is going to be addressing that. Our role.
Okay, next we have Ms. Gurry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just to Councillor Gesselbrock's point, there is 3 future meeting dates available. So we have November 4th, 25th, and December 9th. So motion would be great. However, it seems to be a consensus anyways that one of those dates you would like to have dedicated to public safety and hear from the officer in charge and have a have a fulsome discussion around either town halls, task forces, or solutions that we can get some engagement on that topic matter from the public to council.
Mr. Rudolph?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we've got a few dates. I actually was speaking with Cam Miller's boss this morning, who had previously had a practice of coming to speak with councils and hasn't done that since probably a year and a half anyway. He was talking about staff that haven't been here since quite a while, or at the last meeting. So I would suggest, and I had talked to him about having him come and have a session with council. It would be nice to have him involved as part of this conversation. I think policing and get policing prepared with statistics, and I understand they're in the process of gathering that. My question would be more about process for that day. If we're to schedule that, are you anticipating, and it might attract some interest from members of the public who want to participate? So right now it's our practice to have that as part of the end of the meeting. So it would be your vision that this is a council conversation and then have input, or would you like to have a different format for that GPC a little bit, or just throw ideas on the table and then move forward after that, which could include town halls and that type of thing. So this is sort of a partial meeting, but it's really your meeting, and then you have to decide if, committee, town hall, whatever you want to get out of it. So I'm just asking when you're putting it out there what your thoughts might be on it.
Thank you, Chair. Just further to that, yes, that's a great question Mr. Rudolph has proposed to you. However, yeah, I was thinking that the council discussion, GPC discussion would come first and then town halls after, but that ultimately is your decision. Like that setup.
So, Councillor Hammonds,
Thank you, Chair. My understanding when we created the GPC was always to invite members of the public where appropriate. And I think that's one of the ways that we haven't yet seen its full kind of iteration. And I think this might be an interesting opportunity to test that, to see if it works. I don't know how we would go about choosing the community members, but given the weight of this in the community right now, the conversation, I think it would be a valuable one to have. And maybe we do a very small kind of test and then we have the bigger town hall so everyone feels like they get to participate. But I think this is a key component of the GPC that we originally envisioned it to have that we haven't yet realized, and this would be an interesting opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. After you, I love this discussion, and I think I just seen sort of how we're using the GPC as a tool. I think that it's quite clear that from the town hall that we went to, there was some utility in that. It's clear the community needs to feel that it's being listened to. It's clear that there's a sense of like, what as a city, how are we communicating information and getting information out about simple things around jurisdiction? I think to a lot of people it was news that the temporary housing shelters are not run by the city. And that's important information to be getting out to people. And so I think that if we're looking at around the issues of public safety, how are we getting the message out and having a dialogue with the community so that it feels like the city's doing everything that it can and getting information out? What are ideas that we can be doing? And if those ideas can be brought to this GPC and also use this GPC as one of the tools that we're actually using to do that, it may make having a separate committee redundant. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to experiment a little bit and leave it in staff's hand to see what would be the best way to initially set this up to be able to provide not a voice, but a way to listen to the community and also generate some ideas on how we want to move forward.
So, Your Worship, Mr. Chair, I think we have to avoid the idea that this is a town hall meeting. This is not what we're talking about. It's council's committee meeting, but you're looking for a way to incorporate some opportunity for input at the same time, maybe then plan for other things in the future. But so we have to manage expectations a little bit, but get enough sufficient opportunity. So this is just a check-in. So there was a very valuable lesson learned last week. There was a lot of information shared about that venue, so it's all available. So we'll just have to make sure we have the right resources in the room to deal with some of the questions. And I guess the idea, the goal is to have a conversation, try to unpack the subject a little bit, look at where scope is and what you might want to do in the future. or what we can do in addition to the task force, the work that's going on by the current initiatives by the police department and so on to deal with this, and what are our options. And we're looking for solutions, as that meeting was last week. It was very well managed, and it was trying to seek solutions, because we hear all the time problems. It's not, it's more finding solutions to get going. So, any other advice in terms of shaping the day so it's successful for you is really important.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner, then Thor.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Hammond. That was one of the things I thought about the GPC, is that we were to invite people from the outside to make presentations. As just throwing it out there, maybe we just put it out that we're accepting applications, and tell us what you want to speak on this subject from individuals in public, and then we can just pick the ones we want to come listen to us.
Delegations.
Next is Councillor Thorpe, followed by Martman and Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, to be honest, I'm getting more and more confused as this conversation develops. I think we're talking about at least 2, maybe 3 different things here. Councillor Armstrong's original intent was to talk about forming a committee or task force on public safety. And I'm willing to have that conversation. I have serious reservations about the effectiveness of such a step, but that would be part of the conversation. But I think we've sort of morphed into a bigger general conversation now about allowing a forum for sharing ideas and hearing from the public. And the meeting the other night at the Caprice Theatre certainly allowed people to request of the organizers, which I thought did a very good job, to request and plead for possible solutions. I'm not sure I heard a lot that would be applicable at our local level. I think there was some good information sharing, and there was certainly some venting, which I quite understand. So we can look at some forum for allowing another of those type of sessions, but I see that as quite different than the pros and cons of forming a task force on public safety. So now I guess I come back to my starting statement, is I'm confused about what we're really looking at here now. Mr. Rudolph,
I just think my understanding is that there seems to be a desire to have a GPC dedicated to the subject matter, and we're trying to shape that, because that is the agenda item that we're on here at this stage of the program. And this is something that's open to you at every GPC, is to look forward and see what topics you would like to have on your agenda. So it's just, certainly could deal with just a committee idea, or you could move this to a separate session where you provide some, bring in the police and that type of thing, and have a conversation. So it's clearly up to you how you want to handle it. Do you want to have a GPC on this, yes or no? B, and we will try to plan for that.
Okay, we have 4 more councillors wishing to speak, starting with Councillor Martman, followed by Hammonds, Brown, and Gizell.
Thank you. I think Councillor Thorpe, there are a couple of discussions going on, but they are related in that we're talking about a subject to bring back to the GPC, but I think there's also, like I was understanding as Councillor Hammonds, that we wanted to engage the public more in our governance and priority committees. Now, I know that at the end of every meeting, there's always the opportunity for any members that are out there can always come and speak to the items on the agenda. So that's one way that if the public knows this is a topic that's on our agenda, they will have the opportunity to engage. Although I think that a good point was brought up about the order, is this is such an engaging topic. Do we want to actually hear from delegations from the public prior to the superintendent and other information that can go along with it? There's something in my memory in one of our policies or procedures about having 4 delegates sign up to an item on the agenda. That's council, because one of the ways that people could come to the GPC is we could say that they could sign up as a delegation, and we could take only a limited amount. I don't like to get into choosing who we would have speak and not speak, because that's our own biases. I don't think we should get into that. But if it was a system that was designed with equity, then we could say the first. And anybody else who attended would always have the opportunity to speak at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Rudolph's earlier question about what outcomes I would like to see from this GPC. So a part of it would be education. Like Councillor Gesselbrock said, there were many in the room on Tuesday night who actually didn't understand the very basic fundamental pieces of what we can do versus what the province can do. And I think while I don't agree with the mayor's points completely about jurisdiction, I think education is completely within our realm, and that's something we should be doing with our citizens. This is an opportunity for engagement, so that would be an outcome. I'd like to talk about a communication strategy around how are we talking about this? What is our role, particularly around advocacy? I'd love to have the community walk away, leave the room and say, I know what falls to the federal government, I know what falls to the provincial government, and I know what falls to the municipal government. And here are the ways that I can leverage that information or that knowledge. I can support my municipality in advocating, I can be my own advocate, et cetera, et cetera. So those would be my 4 hoped for takeaways from this GPC.
Next we have Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I definitely agree with that sentiment, and I think the problem I'm sort of seeing with this conversation is that we have yet to agree on the premise of which we're going to get involved. So I think there's going to be varying opinions at this table, and it's probably important for us to hash this out. What is our level of involvement, or could we frame it as ownership over this issue? I think we need to sort that out, because I see that issue emerge time and time again, and maybe we need to sort of have that conversation and settle it. And I would agree. What I would like to sort of just frame that through that discussion is really that needs to be clear for me is what is our level of advocacy in the sense of what are we doing, driving from the city in terms of advocacy, and what are we doing to help guide, shape the community in terms of advocacy. And then if we choose to go down some level of involvement and coordination of the issues, then I do think we need to think serious about what does a communication strategy look like, what does a community education strategy look like, and what does a community engagement strategy look like on those topics. That's the discussion I would be interested in having. I think, and it would encompass things like, is a task force the appropriate method? And from there, we might be divided on this issue, but if we have a motion that sort of sets the agreement, then I think, we be committing ourselves to a path one way or the other.
Councillor Gissel.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Brown articulated quite clearly sort of what I would like to see this GPC coming. And just to speak to Councillor Thorpe's question, I don't want to see this the GPC be specifically focused on whether or not we use a task force, because I think we all feel that this issue is in need of attention, and the public would like some attention to be given to it, and there's information that needs to be relayed, and I think we need the discussion of how the best are we going to give this issue attention. And then aside from that, I like using the GPC as a vehicle to start, because maybe the GPC is the way to give this issue attention without having to recreate a whole nother committee, is that when it's time to have a discussion on public safety, we have a public safety discussion at the GPC, we call in the appropriate people and we have a nice community discussion and get the necessary information and engagement on who knows. But yeah, without beating a dead horse, the next GPC, let's talk public safety and how we're going to engage, and I look forward to seeing staff's creative ideas on how they're going to bring in community for this particular one as a little bit of an experiment.
So, go ahead, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Chair. So if we could just have a motion that public safety is one of our upcoming Governance and Priorities Committee meeting topics,
So
then we
moved by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Hearing none. Well,
sorry. As soon as it makes it reasonably possible.
Chair, just the reason that I didn't give it one of those specific upcoming dates is because I think attendees, we need to figure out those dates. So as soon as we can get the appropriate attendees together, that's when the date.
Councillor Armstrong?
No, I was voting.
Oh, you're voting?
I was still
You're way ahead.
voting.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
I have another topic. That's
Another
okay, Chair.
topic.
Yeah.
Well, we do have.
We do have another item
on the agenda.
Okay.
We haven't got to,
Boathouse.
if there's another item, can that go after the Boathouse one?
Yes, it can. So it is an open discussion, but this topic was added as a potential upcoming topic for a governance and priorities committee as well. So that discussion is now yours to have.
So we will deal with that after the Boathouse one, which Mayor Code is apparently going to update us.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, myself, Mr. Harding, very kindly on Friday afternoon met with Kamala Tang and Ian Nymeth of the Boathouse and Paddling Centre Group. As most of Council will recall, they made a presentation to Council, I believe it was January or February earlier this year. Certainly they're conscious of the fact, as an experienced group of folks in town, that Council, through the good work of staff, is in the midst of budgetary discussions for the upcoming year. I think they are looking for some sense of whether or not Council sees the Boathouse and Paddling Centre as they envisioned as a priority for Council. Certainly as Council, we're trying to determine our capital priorities. My impression is, and it may be appropriate for them to make a further presentation to Council to outline their concerns, is that my impression is that they believe they may not be able to raise the kind of funding that they were talking about or historically had believed they could raise, and indeed would be looking for a much more, if I can phrase it gently, a much more significant public contribution from the state of Nanaimo in order to ensure the Boathouse and Paddling Centre work. I told them at the conclusion of the meeting that I would have this put on the next GPC agenda, and also that I would have it on the POG agenda, Protocol Agreement Working Group at St. First Nation, who had initially expressed a fair degree of interest, from what I understand, in this concept generally, but may not, in light of all the significant activities that they're involved in and projects, it may not fit as far up the agenda. So really what I'm looking for from Council today at their request is perhaps see something as simple as whether or not Council would be happy to receive a further presentation from them, a more fulsome discussion before we're much further into the budgetary process. And at the same time, I told them I would report back to them to see what the interest was from Sinamic First Nation, and it will be on the agenda for the next POG. So that's where we're at. Personally, I think it's worthwhile them perhaps coming back and explaining this more fully by way of a presentation to Council. And if that is done as a presentation, Ms. Curry, we could probably provide them more than 5 minutes potentially. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Chair Tweed and Mayor Crowe, yes, presentations do not have a time limit when they're invited to come as a presentation.
I'm going to recommend that as a potential way to go, if in fact there is interest in doing so. And I'm not going to make the motion myself. If I don't see interest from this Council, then I'll report back to them and say there isn't much interest, and if there is, then the motion will be dealt with accordingly.
I have two speakers requesting the ability to speak. Councillor Hammonds, followed by Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. A point of clarification, would they be invited to a council meeting to make a presentation? Okay, I wasn't sure if this was another GPC topic, so I'm in support. Why not? Listen.
Councillor Armstrong, and then Mike.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from them, but I want to have a detailed budget request, not this, we think it might be this, we think it might be that, as we've had before. I want to know exactly what the dollar amount is that they want, and I want to know how many people will use it. I think that's a really key point for me, so if they covered off those points, I'd be quite happy to hear the presentation.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I as well, I think it's worthwhile to invite them to Council. I think we also have to keep top of mind that this will be public dollars asked. I'm interested in the return on our investment. Again, how many in our community will it serve? I think it fits into lots of great things in our city, our livability and health and wellness. And these things are wonderful. I'd love to do everything our city deserves, but we do have a priority, and part of it is our downtown and our waterfront. But I think it's definitely worthwhile to listen to this presentation. I'll let further speakers go before I make a motion.
Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Chair. I'm certainly willing to support allowing them to come and present again. This project has been talked about for at least 5 years, and it has changed over those years in terms of the funding especially. I would also, in the context of that presentation, need to have information. I think we are getting, looking at Mr. Rudolph, sometime in the fairly near future, and that is with relation to other possible capital projects. And it would have to be looked at in context with other requests and other needs in our community. So I'll support listening to them, but that's all I can say at this point.
Councillor Martin?
I'll make a motion then, that we invite the Boathouse and Paddling Center to a future city council presentation.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner?
Just a question probably to staff. Would a building such as this be eligible for gas tax funding?
Use that from the tree. Through the chair too, yeah.
We're getting more.
Or what was it, what?
Could we use our gas tax money that we get from the federal government to pay for this?
It would be a capital project, so it would qualify from that perspective. I'd have to see if it fell within their guidelines of, because sometimes they have specific guidelines around what kind of capital. So I'll have to look at that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. The only comment I would make is that we want to make sure we're not going to confuse this with another paddling, the one at Loudon Park, which is more than youth-oriented and with significantly lower dollar amount. So let's not get the two confused. That's all I'll say. Yes?
Can I just follow up, just to reiterate the point, I'm not sure who made it, but it's going to be important in our decision-making, not just to hear about this opportunity, but where does it fit within the realm of all of the opportunities we're being asked to consider? So Loudon Park being one of them. So would that be possible?
Yeah, so through the budget process, you're going to have ample opportunity to go through the situation financially that we have, asks, the whole reserves, some of the other projects. We're actually coming to finance and audit next week with the projects, just for your information on it's been coming along. And so I believe there'll be some context to this, but yeah, I think it would be wise to understand that and also understand who's using it, how wide, how much of a community impact that's having. And ultimately, you can make your decision on how you want to handle the allocations of what may not be very many monies available to do much of anything. So it'll be a timing issue as well for you. A very challenging budget year for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, Councillor Brown, you have it.
Thank you, Chair. This one I'm just going to bring to your attention, and I think it's probably not as high in stakes as things around like public safety, but and it's definitely not a sentiment that all those in the arts community share, but some do, and it's sort of flared up a little bit today. That a year in, and there's been a little dialogue with the arts community around some of the some folks that did expect a return to and reestablishment of the previous Arts and Culture Committee. Others expected some engagement around what future planning exercises look like. And I think we have been focused on a lot of things. It's been a very busy schedule, but I think from their perspective, when that is your the thing that you're interested and passionate about and spending your energies to, coming off the last council's decision to sort of move away from that committee and then sort of radio silence, there's a sort of feeling of alienation. And like I said, I don't think it's shared by everyone, but I think the GPC forum, now that our schedule is sort of opening up a little bit, and it might make sense to have one on arts and culture. That way, we as a council get some information from staff about where the department is, sort of the initiatives that are underway and where we see it going with some of that restructure. And I think this might be quite a nice soft place to start with a little bit of experimentation around inviting some of those folks to participate in the discussion around what would engagement and communication with the arts community and culture community look like. I know some have a lot of concerns around our processes of issuing grants, so, do they have some alternatives, ideas? Is there some dialogue there we can be having? And maybe an opportunity to inform them on the future planning processes for the culture plan for creating an island and any potential update timelines and things like that. So we're sort of extending that olive branch and saying, we are open to communication and engaging with you. Not necessarily the reestablishment of the committee, but your voices are heard, and that way we're all operating from the same information in those discussions. So I'll just leave that there for question and comment.
Councillor Armstrong, are you discussing?
Totally agree with what Councillor Brown says. I think it's another great topic.
Okay. Are you here on the same topic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I had you up for something else.
Oh, and that too.
Wait on this one until we're finished discussion on
But this is
Councillor
the
Brown.
discussion.
Okay, then you're
Okay.
on.
So I'd just like to agree with this. I think this council has had a while of just kind of taking an onslaught of information of what's going on in the city, and the onboarding has probably taken us longer than we all anticipated. And I think now is the time when we're beginning to kind of turn that and look at things that we're really setting the direction on. And I think this represents a really perfect opportunity to have that conversation that so many of us came into this job wanting to have. And I completely agree that this is a really interesting opportunity to really test that idea of having community members at the table with us discussing these topics at a GPC.
Do I see somebody else down this side? You're close.
Thank you very much. As council will note from tonight's agenda, there's the, on the topic list relates to the building kitty corner to the police station, so where this topic would, I think, legitimately come up for discussion in any event, but I'm pleased that Councillor Brown has brought it forward for a discussion this afternoon. It is, with great respect to what I had to say earlier around various other topics, much closer to our knitting, if I may use that phrase, than is our other things, where we might care to venture that will not necessarily lead to politically popular or useful ends, whereas the promotion of arts and culture in our community is something we actually fund, both capital and operating, on a regular basis, and is worthy of consideration, let alone on the issue of livability and as an economic driver, as something that's important to us as a council. So I would heartily endorse a much lengthier and more fulsome discussion on this topic. It's nice to talk about the positive stuff.
It is.
Okay, so any further discussion on the arts and culture? Nothing? Okay. Do we need any action on that? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, if you could just move that be one of the future governance inquiries topic.
So moved by Councillor Hemmons, seconded by Councillor Bonner. No further discussion. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now we have Councillor Hemmons has an issue.
Thank you.
Long term.
I just want to share with folks that I sat down with the Director of Community Health this morning, and I don't believe this is a GPC topic. I think it's far enough outside of what we do to spend 3 hours discussing it, but it would be a really interesting presentation to invite, just like we did with the boathouse. Some of the statistics that he shared are just staggering, and I'm not going to share them with you guys because I'm not sure that they were meant to be publicly shared. However, the demographics of our community are at a place where if we're not paying attention to what's happening in community health, the system is showing some serious strains, and I think it's going to be important for us as a council to be really aware of what that looks like, what it could look like, where we can support, etc. So I would just like to offer as an opportunity, the Director of Community Health with Island Health would be more than happy to come and present to council on his work and some of the strains that his department is facing.
Councillor Gressinger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hemmons, for bringing this forward. And my question to Jake would be, where would be appropriate? Mr. Rudolph, where would this be to bring this forward?
Just wondering Mr. Chair, is this something that could also go into the task force as well? Is that relevant to the task force? It strikes me as a health and housing task force. That'd be one. I'm not sure how it fits in. That would be an information item for here, but is it something that would be of value to the task force as well?
I actually think having this presentation to all of council would be valuable. Rather than the task force being a conduit for this. It has a really significant place or role to play in mental health and addictions, how we're dealing with community health. And I just think that because it's such a topical conversation, it's probably best that we're all involved.
Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Chair. So a recommendation maybe to have for the committee to direct staff to get in contact with that person to talk about when an appropriate time and open presentation would be best for them to deliver. Because not unlike the other one with the boathouse, there might be some discussions like staff can have with these presenters about bringing a business plan or bringing the open items, but definitely have you direct us to talk with them and have them come as a presenter to a council meeting would be.
We need a motion to staff to do that?
We did for the other ones, so just we might as well have, for the GPC to direct staff to have them come and present.
Councilor Hammond moves, Councilor Potter second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, question period, there's nothing on the sheet that I saw, unless it's been the last 2 minutes. So we need is there any other business so we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Armstrong, second, Councilor Marlin, all in favor? Thank you.
So remember, we're not keeping this.
Great.